Hello, and welcome to Sleepy Tales by John. Tonight, we'll slowly step into the quiet world of winter, a season that has silently shaped this planet in ways most of us have never paused long enough to notice. As the air grows colder and the light softens, the familiar world around you begins to change. The same roads are still there, the same rows of trees remain standing, yet everything seems subtly different, as though the earth itself has shifted into another rhythm of breathing. Winter is not merely cold weather. It is a state, a distinct mode of nature's operation, where motion is slowed so that forces usually hidden are given space to reveal themselves. Beneath the frost and the silence that can feel absolute, the earth is not asleep. It is busy in another way, quiet, precise, and deeply patient. Physical laws trade roles. New sounds emerge, light begins to travel along unfamiliar paths, and life, though it appears to be resting, continues its work in the dark. There is something almost unreal about the way winter draws a curtain over the noise, allowing us to glimpse forces that usually remain dormant. If you've had a long day, if your mind is still carrying thoughts you haven't yet set down, then tonight's journey is for you. Here, you don't need to remember anything. And you don't need to understand. Each scientific truth will arrive gently, the way snowflakes fall, touching lightly, then dissolving. For now, simply breathe. Let your eyes grow heavy and your body soften. Let the stillness of winter carry you towards sleep. Let us begin. All right. As the world slows, as winter lays a different rhythm across everything, something very small begins to happen. This is when snow starts to form, not only from water, but from things that have existed in the sky for a very long time. High above you, even on the clearest days, the air is not empty. It holds countless tiny particles drifting quietly. Mineral dust, sea salt, ash from distant volcanoes, and sometimes even dust from space. These particles fall to Earth every day, slowly and steadily, almost entirely unnoticed. Some of them are remnants of comets, asteroids, or microscopic meteorites that burned as they entered the atmosphere and broke apart. After losing their light and heat, they don't disappear. They continue to fall through layers of air until they become part of the sky we breathe. In the winter, when the air is colder and more stable, snow begins to form in a very particular way. Ice crystals do not appear at random. They require a nucleus, an initial anchor for water to freeze around. And it is often these tiny airborne particles that take on that role. As a snow crystal grows, it does more than gather water. It sweeps through the air, collecting anything small enough to cling to its developing structure. Over time, that crystal carries layers within it: frozen water, trapped air, and sometimes particles that have traveled an extraordinary distance before arriving here. When snow reaches the ground, we usually see only a quiet white layer. But in laboratories, scientists have done something simple. They collect snow from remote regions, melt it under clean conditions, and filter the water through extremely fine membranes. Sometimes what remains does not resemble ordinary Earth material. Under a microscope, these particles can show features characteristic of cosmic dust, minerals formed without water, or tiny glassy grains created by extreme heat and then cooled very rapidly. These traits suggest they did not originate from soil, rock, or familiar biological processes. They came from elsewhere. This doesn't happen with every snowfall, and it doesn't happen all the time, but occasionally, under very specific conditions, winter becomes a silent transport route, delivering material from space to Earth's surface, far more gently than any meteor we've watched burn across the sky. Knowing this doesn't make snow more magical. It makes it more real. Real because it shows that Earth is not separate from space. Real because what falls outside your door may once have been part of a long journey, entirely beyond human sight. And when you sleep on a winter night, the snow outside isn't only insulating and reflecting light, It represents a vast process unfolding quietly. The sky above you is constantly exchanging material with this planet. No sound, no obvious sign, just steady continuation. Winter, with its cold and stable air, simply makes this process easier to notice if we know where to look. And, like so many things in winter, you don't need to get up to see it. You only need to know it's happening. The snow will melt, water will flow away, those particles will continue on another journey, into soil, into water, into Earth's familiar cycles. But in the brief moment when snow lies still, it holds a tiny trace of a distant sky. And perhaps that thought is enough, not to make you more curious, but to help you feel more at ease, to remind you that the world you live in is not closed, that even in winter's silence, long movements are still unfolding, movements that don't require your attention or your wakefulness. Your task is simply to lie still and let winter do its work. If you've ever walked across dry, powdery snow on a very cold night, you may have noticed a strange sound, a short, unexpected squeak, almost rising from directly beneath your feet. This sound doesn't exist in wet or warm snow. It appears only when temperatures are low enough for snow grains to become brittle. In this state, each grain is a hard crystal with a defined structure. When pressure is applied by a footstep, the grains don't compress like mud or damp sand. They rub, slide, and fracture. Thousands of tiny breaks occur almost at once, creating a distinctive sound the ear perceives as a squeak. This sound is a direct result of physics, of crystal structure and temperature. But in winter's quiet, it becomes a clear sign that the world is in a different state. Simply by hearing snow beneath your feet, you can sense how dry and cold the air is without ever checking a thermometer. Winter, in this way, speaks through very brief sounds. Snow isn't the only thing that makes noise. When cold temperatures persist, lakes and rivers that freeze begin to speak as well. Ice is not a fixed sheet. It expands when warmer, contracts when colder. During nights with rapid temperature changes, especially after sunset, stress builds within the ice and is suddenly released. The result is deep, resonant sounds, booms or cracks or pings that can travel great distances across frozen water. These sounds aren't immediate signs of danger. They are natural responses of materials to temperature change. Yet in winter's emptiness, they often make listeners pause, realizing that beneath ice that seems motionless, movement still exists. Water remains below, ice adjusts. The system continues to function, only more slowly and discreetly. Sometimes, ice sounds don't come from large fractures but from small vibrations. On calm lakes, thin ice can resonate when lightly disturbed. A pebble, a distant step, producing long, ringing tones, almost metallic. These vibrations pass through ice and water, reflecting multiple times before fading. In open, cold air, the human ear can detect these layers clearly, because there is little other noise to mask them. Winter air itself plays a vital role in this quiet symphony. When it's cold and calm, the atmosphere often stratifies. Dense, cold air settles near the ground, with warmer layers above. This alters how sound waves travel. Instead of dispersing and weakening as they do in warm, turbulent air, sounds in cold conditions tend to carry farther and remain sharper. Small noises, footsteps, wind brushing branches, distant ice cracking, can reach you with unusual clarity. That's why, on very cold winter nights, the world can sound larger. Not because there is more noise, but because the few remaining sounds are no longer hidden. They travel straight, less bent, less absorbed by warm, unstable air. In stillness, your ears begin to notice details normally lost. All these phenomena, the squeak of snow, cracking ice, sound-carrying air, don't occur separately. They appear together when Earth enters a very specific winter configuration. Low temperatures, suitable humidity, light winds, and quiet surroundings. When these conditions align, winter becomes an empty concert hall. No familiar instruments, no steady rhythm. Just ice, snow, and air, each making sound only when touched in exactly the right way. What's striking is that these sounds don't last. They appear and disappear. They don't follow a predictable cycle. And so, they don't demand constant attention. You might hear a distant crack, then return to silence for minutes, even hours. Winter doesn't force you to listen. It simply allows it, if you happen to be there at the right moment. In this setting, silence isn't empty. It's the most important part of the music. Because there are so many pauses, each small sound has space to exist. Because the world has slowed, your ears can distinguish between wind and vibrating ice. If you're lying down on a winter night, you may hear nothing at all, and that's perfectly fine. Not every night is cold enough. Not every place is quiet enough. But knowing that these sounds can exist, that Earth has its own subtle ways of speaking when temperatures fall, can change how silence feels. It's no longer empty. It becomes a waiting space. In that waiting space, you don't need to stay awake. You don't need to listen closely. Winter's music isn't meant for focus. It's meant for those who've paused long enough for the world to speak on its own. And if you miss a note, nothing is lost. Ice will contract again. Snow will fall again. Air will stratify again when conditions return. Winter in this way isn't a season of absence. It's a season of rare sounds, emerging only after everything else has stepped back. And even if you never hear them, your body can still settle into that slower rhythm. The rhythm Earth uses when it rests, yet never stops working. Now, as winter's rare sounds fade, as squeaking snow and ringing ice dissolve back into familiar quiet, the world slows one step further. No longer something you hear, but something you notice only if you're patient enough to watch. From vibrations in the air, the story drifts down to the ground, following Earth's most familiar paths. Rivers. Yet in winter, even rivers don't always behave the way we expect. We're used to thinking of rivers as always flowing one way, from high to low, from source to sea. One direction, no hesitation. But winter, with ice, wind, and cold, sometimes makes this familiar rule temporarily soften. Not through dramatic reversal, but through brief, strange moments, when water seems to turn back, then quietly return to its path. One of the most common causes is an ice jam. Broken ice drifting downstream that becomes trapped at a narrow stretch, bend, or bridge. When enough ice accumulates, it forms a temporary barrier, like a cork in a bottle. Water upstream keeps arriving, but can't pass as easily. Water levels behind the blockage begin to rise. In that moment, the system seeks balance. Pressure increases and, near the jam, surface water can flow backward, moving upstream for a short distance. The effect doesn't last. It doesn't reverse the entire river, but it's enough for someone on the bank to feel as though the river has hesitated, changed its mind for a moment. Winter makes these moments more likely. Cold forms ice quickly. Expansion and contraction reshape riverbeds daily. And because everything moves more slowly, small changes, hidden during warmer seasons, become visible. In winter, a river behaves like a system observed in slow motion, where even subtle responses have time to reveal themselves. Not only ice can make a river flow backward. In estuary regions, where fresh water meets salt water, strong, sustained winds can create a similar effect. When wind blows continuously from the sea toward the land, it pushes water to pile up at the river mouth, raising water levels downstream. Under certain conditions, this difference in water level becomes large enough to make surface water flow back inland, moving deeper into the land for a short time. This often happens in winter, when powerful weather systems move through, bringing cold winds and rapidly changing pressure. Once again, nothing breaks. There is no chaos. When the wind weakens, when pressure balances again, the river continues to flow in its familiar direction, as if nothing unusual had ever happened. What's worth noticing is this: the river is not wrong when it flows backward. It is simply responding to the conditions around it. The earth does not operate by rigid commands, but by continuous adaptation. When ice creates pressure, water finds another path. When wind pushes water, the flow adjusts. And when those conditions disappear, the system returns to stability. If you look at this with the naked eye, it can seem very strange, but through the lens of physics, it becomes a clear illustration of how energy and pressure are always trying to redistribute. Winter simply makes that process slower and easier to see. Like slowing down a film to reveal details that would otherwise be passed over. In the quiet scenery of the cold season, a river can look as though it's asleep. The surface holds fewer ripples. The banks are covered in snow. There is no insect sound. But beneath that calm appearance, forces are still at work. Gravity, pressure, wind, temperature. Still interacting, still negotiating with one another, little by little. A brief change in the water's direction is proof that this liveliness has never truly stopped. You may never witness a river flowing backward with your own eyes. And that doesn't matter. What matters more is the feeling this phenomenon brings. That even the things we trust to be the most stable still have moments of flexibility. Not to break order, but to allow that order to keep existing. The image of a winter river, then, is like a long ribbon of silk lying still in the cold space. Most of the time, it moves in a familiar direction. But sometimes, when wind and ice touch it in just the right way, that ribbon is gently pulled backward, only a little, then released again. No wrinkles, no lingering marks, only a very brief moment of adjustment. In the slow rhythm of tonight's telling, this story isn't here to surprise you. It is here to soften you. Because if a river can temporarily change direction without losing itself, then moments of hesitation in a human life do not need to be frightening. Not every slowing down is a mistake. Not every turning back is a failure. Winter, by revealing those tiny movements, seems to be reminding us that the world runs best when it is allowed to be flexible. Water flows, ice forms, wind blows, and then everything changes again. Nothing is trapped forever. No state is permanent. And as you lie here listening in a quiet night, perhaps you are also in your own private moment of changing direction. No need to explain it, no need to decide right away. Like the river, you are simply responding to the conditions around you in the most natural way you can, and then everything will return to its familiar rhythm. Pressure will ease, the flow will steady. But right now, in winter's stillness, you can allow yourself to drift with that slower rhythm for a little longer. No need to go anywhere, no need to prove anything. Just lie still and let the world, even if it flows backward for a moment, continue to move gently around you. Now, from the slow movement of water, the world shifts into something even more delicate, where every change happens right before your eyes, yet becomes clear only when the night is cold enough and quiet enough for you to feel it. On very cold winter nights, the air no longer mixes freely the way it does on ordinary days. Instead, it layers itself. The cold air quietly slides down and settles close to the ground. A warmer layer above remains in place like an invisible lid. This phenomenon is called a temperature inversion, a reversal of the way air usually behaves. And although you cannot see it, you are standing right inside that structure. When this cold lid forms, everything near the ground begins to change. Exhaust, water vapor, fine dust, even the scent of a city no longer rises easily and disperses. They are held down, lingering in the lower layer of air, slowly accumulating. That is why calm, windless winter nights often feel different, not only colder, but denser. The air seems to have weight, In those conditions, chemical reactions proceed by a different recipe. Some reactions that require high energy slow down because of the low temperature. But other reactions, those that depend on molecules being close to one another, become easier to happen. When air is trapped near the ground, its components have more opportunities to meet, to interact. Winter does not make chemistry disappear, it changes the rhythm of chemistry. You can sense this without any equations. It is the feeling of winter haze, a thin veil that is not quite fog, not quite smoke, with its own distinct color and texture. Streetlights shining through that layer do not scatter as strongly as they do in thick fog. Instead, they form a soft pool of light with depth. Everything looks closer, yet slightly blurred, as though the world has stepped behind a thin sheet of glass. Cold night air, in an inversion, also changes how sound and scent travel. Sound can carry farther. Smells can linger longer. A familiar street, under the same lights and the same trees, suddenly feels different, not because its shape has changed, but because the mixture of air around it has changed. You are walking through the same space, but in a different version of it. You may not think of chemistry when you breathe, but every breath you take on that winter night carries the trace of this special state. Cold air makes your breath more visible, whiter, slower to fade. The moisture you exhale doesn't vanish at once. It stays for a few seconds, suspended, before blending into the background. It's a tiny illustration of how winter slows down mixing. On a larger scale, scientists observe that during prolonged inversions, the concentration of certain substances in the air can rise noticeably. Not because there are more sources, but because the atmosphere's ability to clean itself is temporarily reduced. Winds are weak. Air does not circulate strongly. Everything is held in a lower, narrower space than usual. But in the quiet context of a winter night, this is not felt as a scientific warning. It is felt as a subtle change in the atmosphere. The world seems placed beneath an invisible glass bell. Sound is softer, movement is less, and each breath becomes more clearly present to your awareness. What's important is that this state does not last forever. When the sun rises, when wind begins to move, when the Earth's surface slowly warms, the layers of air mix again. The invisible lid is lifted. Air circulates. What was held down is released. The world returns to its familiar configuration. Winter in this way creates only temporary intervals, moments where the same laws still hold, but are applied more slowly, more clearly, and closer to human experience. You don't need instruments to know the air is different. You only need to stand still for a moment, breathe evenly, and notice that the night is holding you inside a more enclosed space. In the slow rhythm of this story, winter air is not here to make you uneasy. It is here to make the world easier to feel. When things don't dissolve too quickly, when sound, scent, and breath linger, there is more time to notice them or to feel wrapped in them without needing to pay attention at all. If you've ever walked through a very calm winter night, you may have felt that everything around you was listening, not because someone was there, but because the air was no longer rushing away. It stayed, as if waiting. And in that waiting, you also do not need to hurry. A winter inversion, in the end, is a gentle reminder that the environment around us is not always the same street, the same sky. But with a shift in temperature and wind, the whole system operates differently. Nothing is wrong, nothing is abnormal. It is simply another state of the same world. And as you rest in this night, your breath blends with that cold air near the ground. It isn't carried away at once. It stays long enough for you to notice your own rhythm. Each exhale is a slow release. Each inhale is a light receiving. No effort, no adjustment. your body finds the pace that matches the winter formula on its own. The story, from river to air, from large movement to small reaction, continues along the same thread. Winter does not stop the world. It only tightens everything slightly, so what is happening can be felt more clearly. And inside that held, quiet space, you are allowed to slow down, breathe steadily, and let sleep arrive in the most natural way. Without being pulled, without being pushed. Simply settling softly, together with the air that is holding you. All right. When that cold night air has closed around you like an invisible glass bell, when every small movement becomes clearer because it is no longer swept away too quickly by wind, winter sometimes reveals something very rare. A moment when stillness is lightly touched by light. Not loud like a summer storm, not long-lasting, just a brief flash and a low, deep thunder. Arriving among falling snow. People call this thunder snow. At first, it can sound like a contradiction. We associate thunder and lightning with warm, humid air and strong convection. Winter, we imagine, is cold, stable, and quiet. But under very specific conditions, winter can still generate enough electrical charge to release a lightning flash, simply in a different, more discreet, rarer way. Inside thick snow clouds, especially in strong storms near large lakes or coastal regions, air still moves vertically. Tiny ice crystals, snow crystals, and graupel, soft, round pellets of ice, collide continuously as air currents lift them up and pull them down. With each collision, electric charge is separated. Some particles take on positive charge, others negative, and over time they arrange themselves into different regions within the cloud. This doesn't happen as quickly as it does in tropical storms. It is slower, heavier, because cold air reduces the speed of motion. But precisely because of that, when enough charge accumulates, its release can be very concentrated. A lightning flash appears, often brief, often blurred by snowfall, and the thunder that follows is not sharp and booming, but low and muffled, as if thick snow has absorbed part of its energy. This phenomenon is called thunderstone. It is rare, localized, and it usually appears only in very intense snowstorms, where cold air still holds enough energy to sustain convection. Areas near large lakes, where warmer water supplies moisture and heat, are especially likely places for thundersnow. There, winter is not completely asleep. It is simply working at a deeper layer. Lightning in a snowstorm does not look like summer lightning. Falling snow scatters the light, making the flash less crisp and more diffuse, softer. For a moment, the whole space may brighten evenly, as if someone has turned on a large lamp behind a white curtain, and then it's dark again, almost immediately. The thunder that comes with it is different too. It doesn't explode, it doesn't roll far. Cold air and snow reduce its amplitude, turning it into a deep, short sound, sometimes only like a vibration in the chest. Many people hear thunder snow without recognizing it as thunder, because they don't expect it to exist in that setting. What makes this phenomenon special is not its power, but its contrast. In a space defined by quiet, slowness, and whiteness, a flash of lightning can appear without breaking the whole. It doesn't make winter violent. It simply shows that, even in the most stable state, energy can still gather, waiting for the right moment to be released. From a physics perspective, thunder snow isn't mysterious. It follows the same laws as ordinary lightning. But in human feeling, it leaves something different behind. It doesn't make you jump. It makes you pause. Because it comes and goes so quickly, so lightly, like a signal rather than an event. If you've ever been in a snowstorm with thunder, you may have seen that moment like a blink of the sky. Not a warning, not a performance, just a sign that the forces are still there, still operating, even when everything looks still. In the slow current of tonight's telling, this phenomenon isn't offered to make a strong impression. It's offered to remind you that winter is not the absence of energy, but the redistribution of energy. What summer reveals through strong motion, winter holds inside structure, inside pressure, inside small collisions that last. And just like a river flowing backward for a moment, or air being held close to the ground in an inversion, thundersnow is another example showing that Earth doesn't need to be loud to be alive. Sometimes, a single brief flash is enough to remind us that the system is still balancing, still adjusting. If you're listening to this story on a quiet winter night, you may never encounter thundersnow. Most of us won't. But knowing that it can exist, that between white snow and a gray sky, charge can still gather, light can still flare, can be enough to make winter feel a little deeper. Not deeper in a violent sense, but deeper in the sense of layers. Above is stillness. Beneath are silent processes. And in a very rare moment, those two layers touch, then separate again, leaving no clear trace behind. In the final image of this section, you can imagine yourself standing or lying beneath steady, falling snow. No strong wind, no loud sound, just the sky brightening very slightly for a fraction of a second, not long enough to fully wake you, only long enough for you to know it happened. Then the light goes out, the snow keeps falling, the cold air keeps its rhythm, and the world returns to its original quiet, as if nothing had ever slipped in. Winter, in this way, doesn't break sleep. It passes along the edge of waking, touches very lightly, and lets you keep drifting down. The story, from water to air to electric charge inside snow clouds, keeps moving deeper into winter's structure. Nothing needs to be memorized. It only needs to pass through the mind, the way snow passes through lamplight, the way a lightning flash passes through the night sky. And as this part closes, you can let your breath slow a little more, knowing that even winter's strongest phenomena know how to appear and vanish, very quickly, very gently. Enough to exist, but not enough to pull you away from the rest that is drawing near. And when that brief flash has dissolved into the curtain of snow, when the sky returns to winter's familiar soft gray, the world doesn't exactly return to darkness. Instead, winter begins to work with light in its own way, not by creating new sources of light, but by changing the paths light travels. From the moment charge flares and disappears, the story moves into a more delicate layer, where light no longer simply illuminates, but is bent, reflected, and scattered by the very structure of the cold season. One of the first things you might notice in winter is that the ground looks brighter than usual, even under an overcast sky. The reason is snow. The tiny ice crystals covering Earth's surface can reflect light very strongly. Instead of absorbing light the way damp soil or dark vegetation does, snow throws that light back into the air, making the whole space feel evenly bright without harsh shadows. This reflection doesn't only change how you see the world, it also affects the layer of air near the ground. When so much light is reflected, the surface doesn't warm as quickly as it does in other seasons. That helps maintain the layering of cold air, keeping the air near the ground more stable. Light, then, isn't only something you see. It becomes part of winter's operating mechanism. Under certain temperature conditions, when cold air lies close to the ground and warmer air sits above it, light, passing through layers of air with different densities, will bend slightly. This is called atmospheric refraction. Normally, it happens constantly and goes unnoticed. But in winter, when temperature differences are clearer, the effect can be easier to notice. Sometimes you may see the horizon appear lifted, or distant objects seem to shimmer, drift slowly, or stretch, not because they are moving, but because their light is traveling through layers of air at different temperatures, being bent little by little before it reaches your eyes. Winter doesn't warp the world. It simply allows tiny distortions to become visible. On cold, calm nights, when the air is filled with tiny ice crystals, light meets a new material to interact with. Each ice crystal has a certain shape, and as light passes through it or reflects off it, it can create gentle geometric structures in the sky. A halo around the sun or moon appears when light is refracted through hexagonal ice crystals high in the atmosphere. Light pillars appear when lamps or moonlight reflect off slowly falling, vertically oriented ice crystals in cold air. These phenomena don't require a storm. They don't require strong motion. They only need air that is cold enough, stable enough, and quiet enough. When those conditions gather, light no longer travels straight from source to eye. It takes detours, breaks apart, stretches, and only then arrives. The result is a winter sky that looks as though it's covered by a layer of very gentle geometry. Not sharp, not glaring. City lights in winter behave differently too. When snow covers the ground, light from street lamps isn't swallowed by darkness. It reflects many times between the ground and the air, carrying farther and creating a wide, even glow. Familiar streets suddenly look more open, as if space has been gently pulled wider, even though you're standing in the same place. All these shifts make the winter sky feel like a vast sheet of frosted glass. Light passing through it isn't blocked, but it no longer keeps its original shape. It is softened, bent, divided into gentler structures. There isn't a sharp contrast between bright and dark. Everything blends together, slowly. What's notable is that these phenomena don't demand your attention. You can pass right by them without noticing. But even if you never name them, they still shape how space feels. Winter, by changing the rules of light, makes the world feel less harsh, less demanding. Light doesn't push you to see clearly, it lets you see softly and still be enough. In tonight's thread, this part isn't here to dazzle you with visual beauty. It's here to show that light, like water, air, and charge, also adapt to winter. It doesn't vanish when days grow shorter, it simply finds other paths to exist. If you're lying in a room and lamplight falls through a curtain, reflecting onto the ceiling, you may be seeing a very small version of this. Light doesn't go straight. It touches a bright surface, reflects, and spreads. Space becomes softer. Edges become less defined. Your eyes don't need to adjust as much. Winter in this way seems to lower the world's contrast. Not to make everything blur, but to make everything gentler on a nervous system that has grown tired. When light isn't sharp, the eyes can rest. When images aren't crisp, the mind loosens too. Halos and light pillars in winter skies often make people pause and look, but not for long. They don't hold you with overwhelm. They're only beautiful enough to be noticed, then light enough to be let go without regret. They last exactly as long as needed, then dissolve when conditions change. And when they dissolve, there's no sense of loss. Because light is still there, it's simply traveling by another path in another structure of air. Winter doesn't take light away, it teaches light how to slow down. As the story reaches this point, from rare sounds to rivers briefly changing direction, to air holding your breath close, to charge flashing, and now to light being gently reshaped, one thing becomes clearer. Winter is not emptiness. It is rearrangement. Every familiar element, water, air, energy, light, remains but works under laws that favor stability and slowness. And within that rearrangement, you don't need to be the same as on other days. You don't need to see everything clearly. You don't need to react quickly. Like winter light, you can take the long way, reflect, slow down, and still arrive where you need to be. If your eyes are growing heavy, if the images in front of you begin to soften, that isn't losing control. That is your body doing what winter does with light, reducing intensity, softening boundaries, so you can enter rest. Outside, beneath the frosted structure of cold air, the sky continues to reshape, light by precise laws. And while it does that work, you can allow yourself to stop following. Light will find its way. The world will balance itself. And you, in this softened space, only need to be still, letting sleep come naturally, like winter light, not hurried, not harsh, only spreading gently and then settling down. And now, as winter light has been softened, as the sky becomes a gentle surface your eyes can lean into, the story does not stop at what we can see. It moves one step deeper, into the layer where winter acts most strongly yet is rarely noticed, the familiar layer of physics, where familiar laws still exist but are revealed more clearly because the temperature has stayed low for long enough. From light being bent, the world drifts toward another state, as if Earth has turned its thermostat down slightly, letting details appear that warmth usually hides. When temperature falls, matter doesn't disappear. It simply changes how it behaves. Liquids grow thicker, flowing more slowly. Air grows heavier, less willing to move. Small motions, once blurred by heat, become more important. Winter doesn't add new laws to physics, it simply reduces the noise, so the laws that have always been there can show their faces. Water is one of the clearest examples. As it cools, water thickens. Its molecules move more slowly, holding on to one another longer. Flow becomes steadier, less turbulent. Very small forces, friction, pressure, surface tension, begin to play a larger role in deciding where water goes and how it moves. What summer might require big energy to reveal, winter allows to appear through patience alone. Air does the same. In the cold, gas molecules become lazy about motion. They no longer churn space constantly. That makes phenomena that have always existed, layering, slow diffusion, distant sound travel, easier to notice. Winter doesn't create them, it simply stretches time, so your eyes, ears, and senses can catch up. And deeper still, some physical phenomena only truly show themselves when the temperature becomes low enough. Ice does not always have the same structure. Depending on conditions, water can crystallize into different forms of ice, each with its own properties. In extreme cold, those structures remain stable long enough to be observed instead of melting away as quickly as they would in warmer seasons. Electricity and magnetism change their behavior in the cold as well. The electrical resistance of many materials decreases as temperature falls. Some effects, usually drowned out by heat, become easier to measure, not because winter creates electricity or magnetism, but because low temperature quiets unnecessary vibration, allowing subtle effects to step forward. Seen this way, winter becomes an outdoor laboratory. No walls, no complicated machines, only prolonged cold, enough to slow the world into a pace the human mind can follow. What scientists work to recreate under controlled conditions, winter provides naturally. Wide-reaching, patient, and without explanation. The remarkable part is, you don't have to be a scientist to experience it. You only have to be in winter long enough. When you walk more slowly because the ground is slick, when you hear more clearly because the air is less noisy, when you see your own breath because it doesn't vanish right away, you are directly sensing the world shifting into slow mode. In that mode, the laws don't change, but the balance between them changes. Strong forces no longer overwhelm weaker ones. Fast motion no longer hides slow motion. Winter doesn't favor drama, it favors stability. And it is that stability that allows many layers of reality to exist within your reach. Perhaps you've had the feeling that winter makes everything feel clearer, even with fewer colors. That isn't an illusion. When temperatures are low, the human nervous system responds differently too. Everything happens more slowly, and the brain has more time to process each small signal. Not because you're more focused, only because the environment is pressing less. Winter, therefore, isn't a lack of energy. It is a redistribution of energy. Instead of being concentrated in large and fast motion, energy spreads out, resting in structure, in pressure, in molecular bonds. It doesn't vanish. It simply lies quieter, ready to be noticed. In tonight's thread, this part isn't here to explain physics completely. It's here to let you feel that there are times of year when Earth naturally creates conditions that make the world easier to understand, not by simplifying it, but by slowing it down. When everything isn't in a hurry, you don't need to hurry either. If you're lying still, letting these words pass by, you may be entering a similar state. Your body lowers its pace, your breathing deepens, your thoughts no longer race. Not because you force yourself to rest, but because the conditions have ripened. Like winter physics, sleep doesn't need to be manufactured. It only needs to be cold enough, quiet enough, stable enough to appear on its own. Out there in the world, when temperature drops, structures that were fragile become more durable. Details that were hard to see become clearer. Processes that were too fast become observable. Winter doesn't hide reality. It gently lifts the thermal curtain to show what has always been there. As the story reaches this point, from light to matter, from sensation to law, a shared thread has formed. Winter isn't a single event. It is an operating state of the planet, one that prioritizes slowness, stability, and endurance. Everything still happens. It simply no longer needs to compete to be heard. And in that state, you don't need to do anything more. You don't need to understand everything. You don't need to remember. Like the world in slow mode, you only need to be present, letting the laws continue to operate around you, while you are allowed to drift beneath the threshold of attention, where sleep begins. Earth has turned its thermostat down, not to test you, but to balance. And in that balance, everything, from light to air to water to your own body, finds its suitable rhythm. Not fast, not slow. Just enough to keep existing very softly, very steadily, in the winter night that is slowly closing around you. And when the world has been slowed for long enough, when the physical laws that are loud in other seasons now run in silence and stability, winter sometimes allows a very delicate phenomenon to appear, a kind of snow that doesn't need the high sky. From Earth's slow mode, the story drifts into a moment many people have seen without knowing what to call it. Snow falling from a blue sky, so light it's almost impossible to feel. On especially cold winter nights or mornings, when the air near the ground is very stable, wind almost doesn't exist, and humidity is just enough, ice crystals can form right within the low layer of air. No thick clouds needed, no strong currents lifting moisture high, only air cold enough for water vapor to crystallize directly into ice. This phenomenon is called diamond dust. Not real diamonds, of course. The name comes from the way these ice crystals reflect light. They are very small, often only a few dozen micrometers, yet their crystal structure is clear. When sunlight is low or streetlights shine through, each crystal becomes a tiny reflective surface, glittering in the air. They don't fall from great height. They appear and then drift downward, slow as mist. What makes diamond dust different from ordinary snow isn't only its size, but the quietness of the environment required for it to exist. If wind is strong, the crystals scatter. If temperature rises even slightly, they vanish. If the air is turbulent, they cannot form in time. That is why diamond dust usually appears in very special winter moments, when the world is almost still. You can walk under a clear blue sky, cloudless, and still see tiny white specks glittering as they drift down. No sign of snowfall, no sound, only air crystallizing itself, then lightly releasing what it has just created. If you're not paying attention, you might mistake them for dust or for reflected light. But if you stand still long enough, you'll see them fall. Not straight down, but swaying gently, turning slowly, as if considering where they will touch. Streetlights on such nights often make the phenomenon easier to see. When light passes through a layer of slowly falling crystals, it can form vertical pillars of light, stretching from the ground upward. Not because anything in the air is emitting light, but because the light is reflecting and refracting off countless tiny surfaces, aligned almost vertically as the ice crystals fall through still air. Sometimes you may also see a faint halo around a light source, or an area of light that looks as though it has been dusted with very fine glitter. There is no clear beginning, no sharp boundary. Everything appears and then fades as you move, as a slight breeze rises, or as temperature changes by only a little. Scientifically, diamond dust isn't rare in very cold regions, like the Arctic or icy plateaus, but in places where people live, it's rare enough to become a memorable moment. Not because it is spectacular, but because it is so light, so quiet, so undemanding of attention. In this moment, winter doesn't need clouds to make snow. It only needs air still, enough to rearrange itself. That says a great deal about the state of the world then. When energy is low, when motion is small, when nothing is being disturbed, the most fragile structures can exist, even if only for a few minutes. If you see this phenomenon as part of the larger thread, it continues naturally from what came before. When light has been softened, when air has layered, when matter has slowed. Diamond dust appears as a gentle consequence, not as a new event. It doesn't require preparation. It only requires the world to be in its right state. The feeling of standing beneath diamond dust often isn't like standing beneath snow. There's no sudden sense of colder air, no sound. You may not even feel the crystals touching your skin. They melt on contact, leaving almost no trace. Yet, in the quiet and the light, you can see the air at work. It's a rare feeling, the sense that the atmosphere, usually invisible, has become visible in a concrete form. Not through clouds, not through wind, but through tiny crystals, suspended, drifting down, as if the air is writing out its state, then erasing it immediately afterward. In moments like this, the world seems careful. Everything happens slowly enough not to wake anyone. Light is soft enough not to glare. Crystals are small enough to make no sound. Diamond dust doesn't come to draw attention. It comes to exist at the border between being noticed and being ignored. If you're lying here listening to this story, you may never have seen diamond dust, and you may never see it. But knowing that air can sometimes create snow right in front of people, without needing anything grand, is enough to make winter feel deeper. It shows that not every phenomenon needs a large scale to exist. Some only need the right timing, the right temperature, the right stillness, and the right stretch of time in which the world is not disturbed. In tonight's lullaby thread, diamond dust isn't a climax. It is a settling point, a moment in which everything has slowed enough for the most fragile details to appear. And like them, you don't need to produce anything. You only need to be in a state quiet enough for sleep to form on its own. The final image of this section can be very simple. A winter street. Yellow lamps, no wind, no clouds, and tiny glittering specks drifting down through the light, too light to fall quickly, too small to make a sound. They fall as if they do not want to disturb. Right now, on the ground, everything seems still, but just beneath the snow, life is still continuing to move. From a distance, a winter landscape often carries the look of absolute stillness. A field covered in white, a forest of bare branches. No insects flying, no leaves trembling. But that silence belongs only to the topmost layer. Snow, though cold, is a very good insulating material. When it piles thick enough, it keeps the temperature underneath far more stable than the air above. And it is within that covered space that another world exists. Just beneath the snow, temperatures rarely drop as low as they do on the surface. The ground does not freeze as deeply as we might imagine. Roots are still there. Microorganisms still work, though slowly. Fungi continue breaking down organic matter. Small insects, larvae, and burrowing animals use the snow as a blanket, not as an obstacle. Winter doesn't push life away, it moves life lower, into more sheltered layers. Larger animals adapt in their own way. Many species sharply reduce heart rate and metabolic speed, entering hibernation or a kind of partial hibernation, not sleeping continuously, but switching into a power-saving mode, where every movement has purpose. Some bears slow their heart rate to only a few beats per minute. Some ground squirrels drop their body temperature close to freezing and still maintain life. Some species go even further. There are small creatures, like the wood frog, that can endure controlled freezing. When temperatures fall, water in their bodies crystallizes in certain places, while vital organs are protected by natural antifreeze compounds. When spring arrives, the ice melts, the heart restarts, and life continues as if it had never been interrupted. That isn't magic. It is biology refined over millions of years. Birds, even without hibernating like mammals, change a great deal. Some migrate. Others remain and restructure their bodies by season. Digestive organs can change size to match scarce food. Stored fat is used on a very strict rhythm. Everything is aimed at conserving heat and energy. No excess, no waste. Meanwhile, beneath your feet, the snow-covered soil creates a surprisingly stable environment. Temperatures fluctuate less, wind can't reach, moisture is held. This is where roots continue minimal metabolism, preparing for the next growing season. This is also where microorganisms keep their cycles going, slowly but without stopping. If you could see through the snow, you would find a very different scene from the still picture above. You would see tiny tunnels, air pockets, movements that are very slow but continuous. A small city working in dim light, where every resident knows winter isn't the season to expand, but to maintain. What's notable is that these two layers, the layer above and the layer below, do not contradict each other. The stillness above allows stability below. Snow cover reduces turbulence, creating a buffer that lets life continue without sudden thermal shocks. Winter, in that way, isn't biology stopping. It is life reorganizing its space. Humans, living mostly in the upper layer, often sense only the quiet. We see the snow cover and assume everything has gone to sleep, but biology doesn't work that way. It never stops. It only withdraws into safer places, waiting for conditions to become favorable to return to the surface. In tonight's slow current, this part isn't meant to make you worry about what's happening beneath you. Instead, it brings another feeling. The feeling of being supported, knowing that even when the surface of the world is temporarily quiet, there are systems underneath still working to preserve continuity. And this is true for people too. There are times you seem still, quieter, less moving, less reactive. But that doesn't mean you aren't active. Perhaps, like the world beneath the snow, you are simply moving your life into a deeper layer, where it is protected, stable, and preparing. Winter teaches this very clearly. Not all activity needs to be seen. Not all movement needs sound. Some of the most important processes happen when no one is paying attention, in covered spaces, with a slow and steady rhythm. If you are lying still right now, perhaps you are also in your own very personal, lower layer. Your heartbeat slows, your breathing becomes more even, your thoughts lose their sharp edges, not because you have stopped existing, but because your body is switching into maintenance mode, like winter animals, like roots beneath the snow. In the larger picture of winter, life does not disappear. It only changes position. Above is stillness to preserve stability. Below is activity to preserve continuity. Those two layers need each other. And that balance is what helps this planet pass through long, cold stretches without losing the rhythm of life. As the story reaches this point, from air, light, physics, to fragile crystals, and now to hidden biology, a shared outline becomes clear. Winter is not the opposite of life. It is a strategy of life, a way to endure when conditions are harsh, by drawing inward, protecting what matters, and waiting. And in that strategy, rest is not weakness. It is intelligence. It is necessary. Like the world beneath the snow, you do not need to prove anything right now. You only need to be in your own layer, covered, kept warm, allowed to slow down. Above, the snow still lies quietly. Below, life still runs. And between those two layers, you can lie still in this moment, knowing that not everything needs to happen on the surface. Some of the most important things are being cared for in silence, very steady, very enduring, so that when the time comes, they can return intact. And when you have gone deep enough into winter's lower layer, where life folds in on itself to keep going, the story does not end with movement. It ends with traces. Because after everything winter does, slowing, cooling, covering, there is still one final task it quietly performs: recording. Not in words, not in symbols, but in structure, in layers, in the patient arrangement of matter. From life hidden under snow, winter leads us to its most silent role, Earth's record keeper. Let's begin with lakes that seem to be sleeping. When winter arrives, a lake's surface freezes, forming a natural lock. This ice layer prevents wind from stirring the water beneath. As a result, the lake becomes clearly stratified. The coldest water sits near the surface, close to the freezing point. Warmer, heavier water lies deeper below. The two layers do not mix the way they do in other seasons. In this state, oxygen and nutrients are distributed in a completely different way. Some zones become richer in oxygen, some become poorer. Microbes, algae, fish, everything must adapt to that new map. A winter lake does not stop living, but it lives within a structure held steady long enough for scientists to read, like reading a page whose letters are not erased by motion. On land, another process is also recording winter's imprint: frost heave, the lifting of soil by ice. When water in the ground freezes, it doesn't only expand, it moves. Liquid water is drawn toward colder zones, forming ice lenses within the soil. These lenses grow, lifting the layer of earth above them little by little. Through many cycles of freezing and thawing, the ground shifts. Stones rise, cracks appear, structures are pushed slightly out of alignment, sometimes not noticeable at first. Winter does not destroy with brute force. It rewrites the terrain through slow repetition. Each cold season is a very thin stroke, but over many years, those strokes add up into a clear line. Ice on a larger scale behaves the same way. On big lakes, on sea ice, the ice surface is not a single unbroken sheet. It cracks, slides, collides, and separates. Large slabs push into each other, forming tall pressure ridges. Openings appear and close again, called leads. The scene looks like a small-scale version of plate tectonics, not inside Earth, but right on the surface of frozen water. There is no magma, no earthquakes, only ice, wind, and temperature differences. But the principle is the same. Matter is stressed, it responds, and it leaves traces. Winter doesn't just cool ice. It rearranges ice according to laws that anyone patient enough can read. And then, perhaps the largest notebook Winter writes is right in front of us: snow. Each time snow falls, it does not erase the old layer, it places a new layer on top. Each layer carries information from the moment it formed: temperature, humidity, air composition, even dust and pollution. Over time, these layers accumulate, compress, and become the foundation for glaciers. In ice cores drilled hundreds, even thousands of meters deep, scientists can read Earth's climate history. This year colder, that year wetter, when volcanoes erupted, when the atmosphere changed. The planet does not need to explain itself. Snow has recorded everything. Very honestly, very patiently. What is remarkable is this: winter has no intention to record. It does not know it is creating data. It only does what conditions require it to do. And because of that, those records are unbiased, not emphasized, not selective. Each layer of snow is a line written by temperature, by wind, by water vapor, not by will. In tonight's storytelling flow, this part is not meant to overwhelm you with the scale of time. It is meant to bring a different feeling, the feeling that nothing in winter is meaningless. Even silence is being saved. Even the days that seem to pass without leaving a trace are, in fact, still being recorded. Very steadily, very deeply. And in that picture, humans are a very small part. Footprints on snow will disappear, but the snow beneath them remains. A building shifted by frost heave is not merely a mishap, it is a small annotation in the planet's notebook. Winter was here, long enough, cold enough. The final image of this story does not need a climax. It only needs complete stillness. You can imagine yourself lying down, as if lying on a very large white page. That page is not empty. It holds countless lines, written in ice, in water, in cold air. But you do not need to read them. Each layer of snow beneath you is a note. Earth has written in silence. No hurry, no emphasis. Only recorded, then left there. And in the same way, you don't need to do anything more to be memorable. Your presence in this moment is already enough. Winter does not ask how much you understand. It only creates the conditions for everything to be set down layer by layer. Light has been softened. Air has been held close. Matter has slowed. Life has withdrawn into deeper layers, and now all of it is being recorded. Not to judge, not to conclude. As the story closes here, there is no call to stay awake. Nothing you must remember, only a very quiet feeling that this planet has been doing this long before you appeared, and will continue doing it long after you fall fully asleep. You may let your eyes close, as if shutting a thick book. But the pages inside do not disappear. They rest there, held by winter, waiting for another time to be opened. And for now, in this night, you do not need to read any further. You are lying among lines the earth writes in silence. And like snow, you can stay still, letting everything settle, layer by layer, very light, very even, until you no longer need to be awake. Good night.